Hello. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the inaugural session of the conference, Digitalization and New Frontiers of Service Delivery, Opportunities and Challenges, organized by BRAC Institute of Governance and Development. I'm Fariza Rahman, and with me, I have my colleague, Rezwan Kazi. Together, we will be hosting the 3-day-long conference that will explore the dynamics of digitalization and inclusive development. The sessions will delve into examples from both global and local perspectives, analyzing the key challenges, opportunities, and lessons in ensuring inclusive digitalization. Before proceeding, I'd like to invite Dr. Imran Mutin, Dr. Vincent Chang, Dr. Stefan Durkin, and Anu Chaudhry to come up on stage and take their seats. Thank you. I would like to welcome Dr. Imran Mutin, Executive Director of BIGD BRAC University, to share his welcome speech and tell us a bit about the inspiration behind this conference.
Respected Vice Chancellor, BRAC University, Professor Vincent Chang, our guest of honor, Professor Stefan Durkin, and Anu Chaudhry, and all of you, welcome. I would like to start off with, remembering the suffering that people in the northeast part of Bangladesh right now is going through because of an unprecedented flood where over 2 million people are affected in the 3 northeastern districts. So I have to start off with that. So let me, kind of tell you a bit about why we decided to have this conference and what is it that we're trying to really achieve here. So I think the main reason is we really believe that there is real potential for digitalization to improve governance and development outcomes and processes in Bangladesh. So it really stems from this excitement of this potential of improving governance and development outcomes. However, we also know that there are obviously amazing opportunities, but there are important limitations and very real and deep pitfalls that we also need to be aware of. This is exactly why the choice of the right sequence, pace that works for our ambition becomes extremely important. And I hope that in this conference, we will be talking about and we will be having conversations about what is the right sequence, what is the right pace, and under what conditions digitalization solutions of certain types will work, and maybe we have to take other strategies to solve other types of problems. So I think this is going to be really important to take that critical choice-centric perspective of the right sequence, pace that works for us. Now, this conference also stems from a strong belief that we need a strong, joined up, bold, learning-focused knowledge agenda to be able to deliver on this right pace, sequence, strategy that we really need to deliver on a meaningful and impactful transformative digitalization agenda for our Bangladesh. The problem we see is that the current knowledge agenda is fragmented and not joined up. And at least in 3 different dimensions, we think the fragmentation is happening. So one is the disciplinary fragmentation. So this is a space which requires true interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary approaches across very diverse group of disciplines. And that's exactly where I think university becomes extremely important. And I'm sure our Honorable Vice Chancellor will reflect on that. But the disciplinary fragmentation is a real one between social science and data science and engineering and also humanities, because I think humanities plays a very important role in terms of understanding some of these challenges, some of these problems. The second fragmentation is around global and local. So there is a fragmentation also with respect to the transfer of knowledge and how knowledge flows between the global and local. And the local fragmentation between across disciplines makes it extremely difficult for us to really cohere from below to be able to take advantage of global opportunities in the knowledge domain. And I think that's also really, really important. How do we really get more connected and joined up at the local level to be able to really benefit and engage with the global opportunities? And the third dimension of this fragmentation is the fragmentation between industry and the knowledge sector. And while this is generally true for all different areas, but especially for the digitalization agenda, and if you're really going to make it transformative in terms of its impact, these three fragmentations are very important to address. Now, we obviously need to learn from elsewhere. We need to learn from outside. And we have Professor Stefan Dirk on, who will be talking to us about the global lessons. But I think it's also important that we also learn from ourselves, learn from within. In Bangladesh, a lot is happening with respect to digitalization. It's been 14 years since Digital Bangladesh was announced in 2008, 12 December. We have got Ani Chaudhary here, Policy Advisor A2I, who will be talking about what have been the experiences and lessons from that experience. But a critical reflection of our own experiences and learning from our own context is going to be extremely important to be able to deliver on this agenda. So this is what we intend to achieve in this conference: a more joined up and more context-driven knowledge agenda to support our ambition of inclusive and transformative digitalization. We have got 12 sessions, over 40 presentations in this conference, through which we will be exploring this overall objective. This is a conference, so it's supposed to be a confluence of ideas and a platform from where we start critical conversations that we will take forward. Welcome, everyone. Thank you very much. I would now like to welcome our Honorable Vice Chancellor to give his opening remarks and declare the conference open. Thank you very much.
Guests, colleagues, good morning. On behalf of the university, I welcome all of you to this conference. Bragg University, as most of you probably have been aware, has aspired to become a global institution from Bangladesh. To achieve such aspirations, we have focused on, in the near term, 3 key pillars going forward. I talk about them quite often, but let me recap briefly. First is international engagement and collaborations. We have so many international partners on the project level or individual level. However, in the higher education in Bangladesh, there had been non-university to university collaboration. I'm happy to inform all of you, we have established university to university collaboration at university level with university in the US, in the UK, in Australia and Turkey, and very soon Japan. This is first of its kind in higher education in Bangladesh. Second, transformative student experiences. We are launching, I'm not going to elaborate here, we are actually launching a few student programs which not only outside the classroom, some of them are outside the university, and some are even outside the country. And the purpose is to allow students to learn besides classroom, that some skills are very important, not just for now, but also for the future. Fourth industrial revolution industry is something not just from classroom setting. So we are launching a very unique student program. And this is, again, the first of its kind in Bangladesh. Third, research with impact and relevance. In our portfolio of research with impact and relevance, one of the key components is our signature research capability on development, particularly on social, but I would say on both social and economic. In the past, we have focused on mainly the social side of development, such as poverty, governance, education, and public health. Going forward, we will balance it with the economic side of development, such as technology or any key factors for economic development. Meaning, we will be start shifting our focus, I should not say shift of focus, we will be starting emphasize more and more on wealth creation rather than poverty alleviation, which, by the way, is still very important, but it would not be the only thing we're talking about. We're starting to focus on wealth creation. We'll be starting talking about, for example, women empowerment instead of gender equality, because that is something that could drive our economic growth. So to be more specific, we are participating in setting the country, Bangladesh, fourth industrial revolution agenda. We are leading in various first of its kind women empowerment programs. And we are initiating digital health services research capability, all of which digitalization is crucial. This digitalization is, without any doubt, a significant welfare enabler or enhancers, particularly for fourth industrial revolution. At the same time, like any other technology, it may create new issues that we have not experienced before, such as digital inclusion or digital biases. I'm pleased that all of this opportunities and challenges will be discussed or maybe debated in this very rich conference. On that, I wish this conference a great success. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Vice Chancellor. I would now like to invite our first keynote speaker, Professor Stefan Dirk on. He'll be talking about digitalization for inclusive development. He's a professor of economic policy, Blavatnik School of Government, University of Oxford. Stefan.
Hope we're loading the slides just now. Thank you very much. Okay. Imran, thank you very much for inviting me for this event. Vice Chancellor, thank you very much for speaking to us. And well, it's an enormous pleasure to be able to briefly talk about some of our own work and our own experiences, not just here in Bangladesh, but actually in a few other places around thinking through and even actively trying to promote digital transformation processes in a few different countries, but also some of the lessons we learned from it. And I will be talking to you on work we've been doing over the last 3-4 years from Oxford, including here with BIGD here in Bangladesh, but also in a series of countries where we tried actively to promote careful thinking by key policymakers and other stakeholders around the digital transformation, but also allowing us to study a little bit like marking our own homework of how we were doing in this respect. So, and I want to focus, and I was very pleased that the Vice Chancellor was mentioning, moving also towards thinking not just about service delivery as something that is somehow a side part of what's happening in society in general with digital, but also thinking about, what it means when the digital economy starts spreading through our societies and our economies. What are the opportunities and what is actually going on? And of course, a lot is already going on. In the work we were doing, we were struck that, we could drive over a terrible road and see a bus passing us of a lot of young women, and then turning into a plot of land with a brand new building in India where a call center was providing services to firms in London. We also observed when we go to Indonesia, and we have it here as a little picture, those drivers with green helmets, but essentially being a company, Gojek, that set up a whole platform of connecting what used to be informal sector motorcycle taxis to actually connecting them and putting them on apps, and actually being so successful that actually Uber decided to leave the country and leaving space for local entrepreneurs using more local ways of transport. And in this sense, strikingly, a lot of informal workers connecting much more better with customers and doing it. Of course, we are very familiar with the stories we hear, but maybe sometimes forget how widespread it is when we go to rural Kenya. And already for 10 years, I could buy a soft drink using a digital payment platform, M-Pesa, that spread it then slowly and far too slowly across other countries as a way of actually doing this. But while we were working on this, we also saw other surprising things, which is in South Africa, in Durban, okay, a middle-income country, but definitely not as rich as the UK, but actually a set of firms specializing in teaching English to Chinese students using Zoom, and systematically actually doing language teaching very successfully, capturing a big market, teaching all the way into East Asia English. And then the final one, a firm that we came across, which definitely surprised me no end, which is Ethiopia, a country you would identify today with conflict and with hunger and with droughts, and definitely still a very poor country that was beginning only to emerge, maybe a little bit competing in RMG with Bangladesh, but still very early days. With terrible internet, I can assure you, with very poor telecom infrastructure, still one of the last two countries with a state monopoly in the telecom sector and terrible mobile phone. And then we come across a firm that basically was providing live football statistics to the Dutch Football League by basically doing all the kind of algorithms and calculations to get the statistics, a bit like seeing what you see with cricket, what is actually happening and run rates, and in this case, football statistics, live being produced for live broadcasts in the Netherlands. So basically firms that get connected in very different ways with the global economy, even in very poor and still arguably economies that still need a lot of progress to have. And so this is actually a bit what we're talking about is, at times slightly chaotic, but definitely more systematic introduction of digital technologies in economy and society, essentially the beginnings of some form of digital transformation. Now, systematic doesn't mean ordered, doesn't mean that it is equal in a way that everything is changing, but things are changing. And we see this also, of course, in Bangladesh, that there are changes how goods and services are being produced, how they're consumed, how they're exchanged, how actually it also starts leading to changes in the way business is organized, indeed how societies and the economy is organized, okay? Now, what's that important, and I think Imran alluded to it as well, is that when these digital technologies are entering, just as with any process of technological change, it's not in an equal way. It's not basically in the way that the status quo is maintained. It will enter certain sectors more than in other sectors. It will affect different aspects of our own social life, our daily life, but definitely across society, different groups, rich and poor, young and old, are differentially affected. And that's actually quite an important thing to be aware of. So going away from the kind of simple, hooray, isn't it amazing? Or, oh, this can only be bad because there's all the risks involved. And in fact, in our work, we wanted to highlight this. And what's quite interesting, actually the same issues are emerging in rich economies as well. It is similarly entering chaotically, where public policy doesn't quite know how to respond to it. A lot of people overstate the potential or the optimism of how it will work through, and other people overstate the pessimism of how it will all be the beginning of the end of life as we know it. So in this talk, I want to briefly talk about where do you start? And actually, funnily enough, you start when it's already happening. You know, it is happening around you. So what do you do? And so we want to briefly give a few lessons. It's not going to be in huge detail of different places, very different countries where we try to do this. We've now written a book trying to be a bit self-critical about both the experience in working with policymakers, but as well as reflecting the things that went wrong. And I can assure you, we were finding all kinds of things that went wrong. Like in one country that we now have decided not to name anymore, where we seem to have entered in a massive bust-up between the digital advisor of the government and then the ministry that is meant to be in charge of all the ICT, and where basically everything is blocked simply because personality clashes in bureaucratic politics, to another place, and this was Ethiopia, where we were witness and tried to actually see could we help a bit with a standard battle that we've seen across the world between central banks who never liked the fact that Kenya allowed actually M-Pesa and digital money transfers to emerge using a non-banking model via the telecommunication firms, where these battles were being repeated, and in Ethiopia are still live, where the central bank would claim to want to be very open about the introduction of digital money and for transactions, for low-cost transactions, but actually wrote regulations that made it essentially impossible for anything like that ever to emerge, where actually the finance minister was far more forward-looking and ended up in a battle, and we were trying to actually help it. These kind of things are the kind of live experiences of how these policy struggles are taking place. I'm not trying to suggest anything about how it is here, Anya, but we'll, I'm sure, hear some more about you. And I want to briefly talk, very briefly, what is the opportunity, making sure you have a clear framework for it, but what to do, but I mainly briefly give some lessons about how to do it, what we found. And hopefully that's helpful also for here in Bangladesh in terms of thinking a bit about, you know, some of the challenges that we're facing. So the opportunities, for us, it's quite important that this is not simply about service delivery, okay? Although we'll talk a lot about this, one of the things we observed working in a lot of countries, that when we only made it into a niche, that this is only about service delivery through government, that actually we forget that there is a huge part that both will be emerging on the back of it, as well as a whole series of opportunities that are actually underestimated. And in fact, the minimal thing that we would say is that, you know, we wanted to focus on, it's actually the change in economy and society as a whole, of which service delivery, e-service delivery is one aspect of it. Because some of the challenges, including policymaking, are actually quite similar. And there's a big risk that it just get compartmentalized. There's a little bit about e-service delivery, and then there is another stuff, but actually problems are similar. Let me simply mention things like data and the way they are dealt with, but also actually the nature of the infrastructure, the nature of the incentives of service providers in it, and so on. And these will actually be quite similar. And we wanted to actually make sure that you think about it across the board. But let's briefly get the opportunity then well defined. So the first thing is the one that we're most familiar with. And whether it's about e-services or in the economy as a whole, a lot of framing tends to be based around, oh, this is going to be changed how goods and services are produced and provided. And so this is simply about something to do with provision. Actually, in rich economies, it meant that virtually the entire debate ended up being captured about automation. If they talked about both the opportunity and the challenge, it's all about automation. So you get, on the one hand, people terrified of the automation and there's no more jobs. And in the other hand, Silicon Valley suddenly being massive producers of basic income because they said, well, at least we'll give you all a little bit of money and the rest of the rents we'll keep on capturing because the economy will be so technology and capital intensive and we happen to hold to the IP over it. So you get this kind of contrasting experience of the way as a framing of it. What we forget is that it has to have fundamental changes in the way goods, services, money, capital, labor, information, and so on are exchanged. And in fact, that's how we mostly experience it. Just looking at the number of people who have their phones on. That's how we actually, all the time now, getting, multitasking, information sharing, but also how money is exchanged, indeed how capital is allocated, how loans are allocated, how labor markets beginning to be matched by algorithms and so on, and how indeed goods and services are exchanged. So sometimes we forget that, and for those who are economists here, is that, when we look simply at the production side, it's a bit like Ricardian economics, but actually Adam Smith started about exchange. And that actually is the basis of an economy, is the nature of exchange. And there, the transactions costs have dramatically changed. So we changed the way we exchange all these kind of things. And of course, in the technology space, this is not anymore just about automation, but it's about platforms. It's about the way actually certain middle men and middle women are excluded and changed, how actually another way of mediation is happening in financial markets and so on. But once we get to that, we get basically both production changing and all exchange changing, so production and exchange changing in the economy, you'll begin to actually a change in how production and distribution is organized, is the change in the way an economy is organized. Now, why do I like to emphasize a lot? Partly it's to do with, we're doing this in hybrid. There's people at home, there's people everywhere. We can actually do these things. And this is the most obvious thing that we've learned during COVID. But if we think more historically about how technological change affected things, there is no way that the RMG sector in Bangladesh could have emerged through to fundamental change in the last two bits that I'm referring to. Let me actually explain how technology was central to it. First of all, the first level of technology, the production technology, was used already in the 1930s in the US. Production lines of sewing machines. You have pictures of basically sweatshops in New York doing exactly the work that at scale is being done here. This is not the technology of automation. In fact, if anything, it was just a transfer of a technology that was obsolete in certain countries to places like here. But it is technology fundamentally in the 1980s and 90s that allowed RMG to emerge. And there's two technologies here. And both of them have to do with the way exchange is happening. The first one was the container ship. We basically brought down the cost of moving goods across the world between the 1950s and the 1980s down by something like 80 to 90%. Without automation in the ports and the use of standardized technology to move things around the world, there was no way RMG could ever have been profitable. And the second thing is the telephone and the fax machine. It's because there were simple means of communication between the buyers and the producers that actually you could do suddenly very remote production of a simple thing like a t-shirt. That's the similar thing where we're actually beginning to stand for, is that actually more goods because the technology of communication is so improved, more goods can be produced remotely. And so we can actually start seeing a change in the global value chains. Similarly, beyond standardized goods, which were T-shirts and RMG part of, but to a much wider variety of goods. And that's that system change that we can have. And why I emphasize it, because of course it's important for Bangladesh to also move into new ways of engaging with the global economy and exporting things. Okay, I'll come back to that, because there's Philippines, my example. What is very striking is that relatively quietly, a lot of people always say, oh, I didn't quite know this, is that actually probably the earliest mover in outsourcing services was the Philippines as an economy as a whole. Of course, India also, it's been very important, but the Philippines is probably the largest success, where what we call business process outsourcing, BPO services, back to the office tasks, so such as data entry, accountancy, and telemarketing, these kind of things. You know, in Philippines now, you had in the last decade before COVID, probably a threefold increase in the value added GDP contribution by this sector. 1/3 of exports of that country are now these services, and that's about 10 to 15% of the BPO global market was captured by the Philippines. And it employs a lot of people, 1.3 million people, of which mostly women in white-collar jobs. So this is an example that actually say, well, look, this is actually a change in the way services globally are being produced as well. And this is part of that change here. Now, we wouldn't be sitting here as researchers, academics, people in policy, not to worry about the risks involved in it. And I know during the conference, there will be a lot of that. And there is a real challenge because it's so tempting when it comes to the economy to actually say innovate first and then we regulate later. Now, that's the problem with innovations, that you want to have enough space for that innovation. You don't want to squash it too early. At the same time, if you never do it, then you create Rockefeller. You create basically, in the beginning of the 20th century, robber barons in the US becoming massive monopolists, capturing huge rents and so on. Of course, we also know that for the tech firms globally now that are the new, arguably, it's very similar features on the back of IP, having massive monopolistic power and actually capturing a lot of rents. When you then come later, as the Western countries are, the rich economies in Europe and the US are beginning to discover, it's always very hard to catch up. So finding that balance between when you regulate is really hard. Now, there's another big part of it, and it's obviously here we should be concerned with, which also includes issues to do with service delivery, is that there will be people excluded. The risk of exclusion, we shouldn't never be this kind of hooray Henrys of saying everything will be okay. You know, there is actually a real risk that just as previous systems have a lot of risks of exclusion, paperwork, bureaucratic things, there's no reason why we would assume that these services will overcome all of these or create new risks of exclusion of certain groups. We definitely see it in rich economies where older people are definitely finding it much harder to access services now relative to younger people, where maybe in the past there would be systems as the reverse. But when it comes to the economy, you then get a real kind of policy challenge, and since people are very familiar always in Bangladesh about it, an industrial policy challenge. You know, how do you behave towards business? And there is this risk here of a mix of inertia, doing nothing and let everything come up, and then an excessive involvement. Okay, and so it's finding that balance that is really difficult because you know, you get the tendency here in these countries that either little support is given or sometimes a lot of support is given to certain industries, business, and so on. And without making a judgment whether it's too little or too much, you know, yesterday we had the pleasure of visiting Walton, you know, but, you know, arguably they are now a single almost monopolist in this market, at least when it comes to domestic producers. A massive incumbency power they have, but you could at the same time say, well, this is an early mover advantage. You may, and so you get a lot of support from government, and there's no way that their price advantage in the market in Bangladesh could be there without all that government support. But you have to ask yourself, are these rents justified, and how do you actually handle with the next firm to come in? And that's not so entirely clear what you can do. So you get these incumbency risks that you will get. You also will get emerging new business models that we suddenly stuck with, and then we don't know how to change them. That's definitely happened, say in social media, in things like that. It becomes very hard to change these business models. Now they've embedded so much in this particular way. So our offer, and I really won't take long anymore, I have 2 more slides after this. Our offer was essentially, let's go to countries, given these risks and these opportunities, to get a little bit of a sense of what you can do. And, this is a fairly standard process, but rather than our friends in the World Bank usually coming, this is one we prepared earlier, and this is the loan that you can take, and we'll sort it all out. We felt like, we wanted to encourage the partners we worked with to actually do their own diagnosis of where they were, and actually having a consultation process as widely as possible with multi-stakeholders process across the economy and government to actually get some form of strategic primer to actually do it. And somehow, we can talk about ownership in a clear way. We wanted to make sure that this is something they wanted to do themselves and doing it. And of course, we know what roughly the themes would be where action is needed. And I just put them there on the slide. But it is about infrastructure, it's about finance, it's about human capital of the right people to do this, it's about the requisite policy and regulations. Everywhere in the world, it will look like that. But the important thing is, there doesn't exist a blueprint how to do this. And it's actually very striking. This is also when you come from a better off economy, there's definitely no blueprint of how to do it there either, because there we don't quite know how to get that balance here either. So it has to be a process of local discovery of how to actually do this. So finally, what are then the lessons? Well, the one thing we've learned, if you want to do this work and you want to make progress on the public policy side around it, well, we've definitely learned the hard way that we should understand the local politics and the economic interactions with the policy space, with politics very well, okay? It was very striking that, we're faced, and I alluded to already, in many countries, bureaucratic politics, where ICT ministries want to be in charge, or prime ministerial officers wanted to be in charge, and usually there were lots of turf battles, okay? And that's a very striking thing. So you get a lot of bureaucratic, oh, well, ICT, that should be the ICT minister, or something else there. Now, if this is concerning changes across the economy and society as a whole, it can't just be compartmentalized. It has to be something where the finance ministry, the economic ministries, the social ministries, they all have their role within it. And it's actually striking that actually in a lot of places, we could see that they were very much behind because it was stuck in the bureaucratic politics. Then we got, and we definitely saw it in a number of countries, special economic incumbency interest. We've all, in so many countries, we've seen it related to mobile money, digital money, because there the banking sector has very little interest to actually getting these local transactions, cost transactions have. It's very different here in Bangladesh already by now, but historically, it's definitely been a very striking thing. It starts happening in other sectors as well, that people want to have the special advantage over and getting all the advantages to do certain things, the exclusivity contracts in the e-service delivery and all these kind of things, and locking countries into incumbency interest that actually will slow down a lot. Same will happen definitely in rich economies too. And then what we found very striking is that there were huge differences between elite commitment to use the digital transformation as one means for broader economic progress, okay? We had everywhere politicians loving it, but loving it for very different reasons in the way they were doing it. We had in some countries, in one that where nothing happened really, because it became all about, well, I need to have my gadget thing. I need to have my 1,000 little laptops I want to put in the schools, like a one laptop per child type of thing. I wanted to get my hardware in because I wanted to show something material, as compared to another place where actually there was a very careful consideration of where is the niche that we can actually do something. And it requires a willingness that economic structures begin to change. And that actually is a really hard one in most countries, where economic incumbency interests often control a lot there. So we had nothing ever happened in Malawi. It was totally stuck. Where in South Africa, there was definitely an interest in getting something going, but there again, economic incumbency interest, and in that case, actually both on the union side and on the capital side, probably means it's going to be very hard to see that much happening. So the final thing, and it's really the final thing, is some of the success factors. It's basically beyond words commitment by the serious players. You know, some really serious economic players. It can't just be another workshop, another declaration, another compact, another grand declaration. Somehow we're going to do it, because it's actually tough stuff. And it also means the more honest the understanding is of the state of affairs, so the less it's all about the PR of where we are and the projection of a country, but actually an honest understanding, the more progress they seem to have been able to do. And there were several countries, Mongolia was to name, was actually that understanding actually helped us a lot to making progress. But you need champions, you need individuals, you need groups, organizations within government who can drive it. And you need to have overarching political support that goes beyond slogan-esque type of support. It's a complicated thing to happen. And I am finally, it's the very last thing, actually quite optimistic, because one of the things in quite a few countries, because it's quite new, the incumbency interests maybe are not that strong. So where we had industrial policy practices that always the same groups, the same holdings, the same families got the support, because this is quite new, there is actually a bit more scope to politically go beyond the traditional. And so the emergence of new players in the economy was clearly possible in this, but it needs to be played very carefully. What about researchers? Just be sensible that you actually be aware of some of these things. And I have a few things here. Keep an eye on inclusivity. It's a lot of overstatement in the economy, who will win and who will lose. What vested interest may want to stop it, and be critical about it. And especially, is this something with our nature of private sector, with our nature of politics, can we actually implement it? Or can it be easily captured? Or can it become full of wonderful procurement corruption deals that actually get us massive, beautiful building in high-tech parks, but actually not much happening in practice in these places? Can I leave it there? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stefan. I thought that was really, really thought-provoking. And it sort of really, I think, sets the stage very well for the rest of the conference, but certainly for the next keynote by Anil Chaudhary, Policy Advisor A2I. He's going to be talking about digital initiative in Bangladesh, challenges and opportunities. Anil, over to you.
Thank you, Imran Bhai. Good morning, respected Vice Chancellor, Professor Vincent Chang, Professor Stefan Durkon, who's made an amazing keynote speech just now. Dr. Imran Mateen, thank you for inviting me for this very important discussion today. I see the former Cabinet Secretary, Musharraf Hussain Bhuiya. I see Professor Mushtaq Khan, I see Pallavi Roy, I see Purabi Mateen, and many colleagues from government, private sector, and academia in the room, certainly, and also online. I think Professor Durkon talked about some lessons and success factors toward the end. I noted down a few of the things he talked about. 3 C's that really I think, stayed with me. Commitment, cooperation, and championship. I think that sort of sums it up. I think the way you've talked about successes happening in many countries. Obviously, when we talk about digitization, infrastructure is important. When we talk about digitization, the demand and access is important. When we talk about digitization, service delivery transformation is important. But I think what I saw in the last 15 years of doing this in A2I, first from the Prime Minister's office, then from ICT division and Cabinet division, the last few years, it's really about, what I'll talk about primarily is the culture change within the government, how the DNA of the government has changed. So I'll primarily talk about that with a few examples. So this is what it looked like when we started exploring what service delivery digitization meant. So about 10% of the officers within the government had computers, but that looked like that. So essentially covered because it was a sacred object, cannot be touched, cannot be used, doesn't have any use actually within bureaucracy, but sacred objects nonetheless. So this is what we started with. Then came the political declaration of the Honorable Prime Minister, Sheikh Hasina, at the end of 2008, which Imran Bhai talked about. So declaration on December 12th, that will build a digital Bangladesh, a very ridiculous concept at that time. And everybody sort of thought it as a ridiculous concept. Country that's impoverished, food security not ensured yet, ravaged by floods, of which we're witnessing one as we speak every year. Telecommunication infrastructure reaching maybe a fraction of the country, internet less than 1% of the people. So building a digital country in that context was not logical. So throughout 2009, there was lots of ridicule from within government, within private sector, media. But I think we took a sort of illogical, unreasonable path. And that was possible because of a strong political will that was sustained. So as Stefan talked about, if you don't sustain, if it's just rhetoric, if it's just events, then you don't actually make impact. I'm going to play a very short 2-minute video. If I get some support on this.
দেখে মনে হচ্ছে না শহর থেকে অনেক দূরে কোথাও কোনো কোলাহল নেই, সবাই খুব সাধারণ জীবনযাপন করছে। কিন্তু একদম ভুল, ওরা অনলাইনে ক্লাস করছে, সেটা স্কুলে হোক বা ঘরে বসে। জানেন কি, এই গ্রামে আনোয়ার ভাইয়ের মতো তরুণ উদ্ভাবক আছে। ইউনিয়ন ডিজিটাল সেন্টার, ইউনিয়ন ডিজিটাল সেন্টার কোথায় কোথায় কোথায়? এই তো আমাদের ইউনিয়ন ডিজিটাল সেন্টার। জমির পর্চার কাজ শেষ, জলিল ভাই এখন চিন্তামুক্ত। কিন্তু ওইদিকে এত জটলা কেন? চলুন তো।
আরে আপা, আপনি?
আবুল কাকার ছেলে এখানে চাকরির আবেদন করেছিল, আজ চাকরি কনফার্ম হলো। সবাই এখন সচেতন, মানুষ ঠকানোর দিন শেষ। সকল সেবা এখন স্মার্টফোনে। জমির ইনামজারি কমপ্লিট। টেলিমেডিসিন আছে বলে চিকিৎসা সেবা এখন হাতে মুঠোয়। প্রয়োজনীয় পণ্য মিলছে ঘরে বসে। আমাদের গর্ব বীর মুক্তিযোদ্ধা খালেক চাচার সংশোধিত গেজেট নিতে এখন আর মুক্তিযোদ্ধা বিষয়ক মন্ত্রণালয়ে যেতে হয় না।
ঘরে বসে গেজেটের সংশোধনী কপি পাওয়া যায়, বুঝছেন?
দেখে আসি উদ্যোক্তা রেশমা আপা কি করছে।
শুধু ঢাকাতেই নয়, আমার কাজের সুনাম এখন বিশ্বজুড়ে।
এগুলো শুধু গল্প নয়, বরং প্রতিটি বাংলাদেশের স্বপ্ন তাদের জীবনকে এগিয়ে নিয়ে যাবার।
So if we make a contrast between 2008 and today, we'll see that poverty has halved uh, practically. Electricity has reached almost every household in the country. Internet penetration went up about 100 times, mobile penetration 8 to 9 times. Digital services, when we started out, we had about 10 or less than 10 digital services delivered digitally. Now we have over 1,500. So of the 2,500 or so services that the government provides to citizens, we have digitized about 1,500. And by the end of 2023, we hope to achieve about 95% of the services delivered digitally. We started with 2 one-stop service centers. So this is the access point, very important for citizens who are living an analog life, but accessing digital services by going to these centers. So in 2010, these 2 centers went countrywide in 4,500 union councils, the lowest tier of local government. And now we have over 8,500. Many of them are in the purely private sector beyond government. So there is very unique public-private partnership that's happening at the local level. We started with about 100 government websites, basically 100 organizations in the government had websites. Now 50,000 government offices all have websites with presence, information, and services under one umbrella, bangladesh.gov.bd. In terms of championship within ministries, at that time we started with what was called e-governance focal points, 56 e-governance focal points in every ministry. And now we have about 1,000 chief innovation officers and innovation officers within every ministry, directorate, district, and sub-district. So they form a cluster of change agents within the government. Not all of them are as strong as each other, but the strength is growing. So 2007 and 8, we started working on a couple of vision documents. But what we found out in 2009, and also starting with 2008, is that these vision documents were not as useful as the visioning process. The process of working together across government, at that time, the Honorable former Cabinet Secretary was the Secretary for Primary and Mass Education. I remember having a conversation with him. And the fact that we were all working across the entire government machinery from the Prime Minister's office at that time was very useful. So it was the collaboration and the visioning process, not the documents themselves. That was very useful. And the other useful thing was what we called quick wins. So one service delivery item that would be digitized by the ministries themselves. So one item per ministry, one service per ministry. And that created a lot of confidence. So instead of sort of talking about it, they actually, without a lot of knowledge, they actually jumped straight into it. So they started swimming. And that was very, very useful. That was preparation for digital Bangladesh. I'll give you one example of a quick win. So this is from the sugarcane industry. The way sugarcane purchase was done by the government. So all cane purchase is by the government to produce sugar. So from 1932, we used a small piece of paper to send a purchase order to a sugarcane farmer, about 200,000 farmers in the country. And this would have a lot of corruption because this small piece of paper would not get to the farmers on time. Sometimes they would cut their canes and bring them to the sugar mills ahead of time, and the crushing would not happen on time. And they would actually, the sugar canes would lose weight because they would be paid by weight, and sugar canes lose the moisture content because they get dried up. They would not get the right price. So we replaced that one piece of paper with an SMS in 2009. And this was an experiment with 20,000 sugarcane farmers. And then the next year it was scaled up to all sugarcane farmers to 200,000. What we understood was that even though we sent that SMS in English and we had not really predicted that everybody would be able to read it, we saw that everybody did because somebody in the household or in the neighborhood would be able to read that English text. And they would be able to act on it by bringing the right amount of sugarcane to the mill. This improved yield in the sugar mills by about 13% within those 2 years. So this is an example of how a small digital intervention can actually make a huge impact, reduce corruption, improve service delivery, and also create confidence within the Ministry of Industries. This was done by the Ministry of Industries at that time. I talked about the digital centers, which are basically the bridge between analog citizens and digital world of service delivery. So we set it up across the entire country as public-private partnership in government offices first, run by entrepreneurs, micro entrepreneurs who would be provided a small space in the Union Council office, but they would not be paid by the government. So they would have to charge a small fee. So this is a very unique partnership between government where the private sector entrepreneur was allowed and is still allowed to sell public services and private sector services. So right now, there are about 300 plus services that are sold from these centers. So in the last 12 years or so, they have sold about 773 million services within the citizens. And there are about 16,000 entrepreneurs self-employed through these centers. One important thing that we realized from the very beginning was that services need to be simplified before digitization. Because if you put in a computer wherever there is a signature needed for approval, that does not create impact. It's about simplifying that service by eliminating steps in the service delivery process. You see the picture on the left, there are probably a lot more steps than on the right. You don't have to read the small print. That's not necessary. It's the illustration that we have been able to reduce the number of steps. And this service process simplification was a methodology that was taught to hundreds of civil servants, probably thousands by now. And over 700 services have been simplified by using this methodology. So this is an example of how getting a certified copy of land record would take more than 7 days by going to the district headquarters. Now one can apply by going to the digital center, and it takes less than an hour, because the time taken is more than an hour, but the time spent by the citizen to apply is less than an hour. I talked about the national portal, which was probably the largest whole of government initiative that I have seen in Bangladesh, because 50,000 offices worked together under the leadership of the cabinet division to work on this one massive portal. It took several years to build by technology companies, but the important aspect of it was these 100,000 officers across the entire country filling in content. They still do that. So they're basically providing content based on the Right to Information Act that we passed in the parliament in 2009. We actually felt that language matters. We actually learned that language matters. So when we talked about e-governance, it really did not make a lot of sense to bureaucrats, to service members of the civil service. And we changed that to service at doorsteps. It started making a lot more sense. We talked about service, we talked about BPR, business process reengineering, because that's really the methodology of service process simplification. So we changed the name from business to service and reengineering to simplification, because the government felt that they're not a business and the government does not do engineering. So just changing the name actually made a lot more sense. We learned from the very beginning not to use the words corruption and transparency, because it created walls. Conversation could not happen. So we changed that to this term called TCV, time, cost, and visit. And this was a measure of inefficiency in every service that the government provides for citizens. Those 2,500 services, land records, birth registration, passports, loans, any permits. So each of those services has an inherent time to access, cost of access, and number of visits to access the service. So that became the measurement. And this is now part of the annual performance agreement that cabinet division signs with every line ministry, and every line ministry signs with every subordinate directorate. So I mentioned the quick wins. So the quick wins allowed champions within departments to risk a failure without getting reprimanded. So it's basically a protection from the Prime Minister's office at that time, that they can do a lot of experimentation, learn, create impact, even fail, but there will be no negative consequence. So the idea is that the faster you fail, the sooner you're likely to succeed. So that was the culture that we promoted within the government. we introduced something called the Service Innovation Fund, and that allowed non-state actors, innovators, startup companies, researchers, universities to actually experiment with public service delivery improvement using digitization. There is an example of, so on the left side, there's an example of an agriculture extension worker, who's a government officer, who came up with an innovative way to detect crop diseases by taking digital pictures. On the right side, there is a prosthetic limb that was created by an innovator that was commercialized later. Right now, we're working with the Ministry of Health to develop wearable devices to bring data from pregnant women so that better pregnancy monitoring can happen. So just this afternoon, we're talking to a number of development partners who are interested in that kind of a technology. We introduced something called empathy training, which was quite interesting. So about several thousand, I think the initial batch was about 6,000 members of the civil service who went to empathy training. That was expanded later on by the trainers themselves who were members of civil service. So they expanded it themselves to about 30,000 members of civil service who came to this. They actually went through a process of posing as citizens. So we'd bring a cohort of maybe about 30 civil servants from different cadres. So administration cadre, health, education, social safety net. So different types of services coming together and visiting each other's offices. So this was quite interesting because they would pose as citizens. The doctor would go to a school, the teacher would go to a land office, and they would critique each other's inefficiencies. And this created this acceptance that things were not working well. So if this feedback came from the citizens themselves, it would not be taken as seriously. So this created an acceptance and adoption of experimentation within government. So about 2,000 new services and reform services came through this empathy training. We used the concept of gamification, so competition. So reprimand for poor performance based on TCV and award based on good performance based on TCV. And some of these, so there would be dashboards. So dashboards would come up in almost every ministry and every department. And there'd be ranking based on performance of digital service delivery. And that worked really well. The highest award now is given by the Honorable Prime Minister at the end of the year from the Ministry of Public Administration in the form of Public Administration Award. A lot of repurposing happened because we didn't know what some of these technology would be used for in future. For instance, when we introduced 333 as the national helpline in 2018, the idea was that this would be a way for people to call in. People who did not have internet access or could not pay for internet would be able to call into 333 and get information that they needed from the government. So there is a call center set up in partnership with a telco and a call center company. That got repurposed multiple times. In 2019, this became the hotline for reporting child marriages. So several thousand child marriages were stopped by actually calling into this, and this call getting forwarded to the local administrator, to the UNO, Upazila Nirbaya officer. Then during COVID, this got repurposed to the largest telemedicine service in the country. So 4,500 doctors joined this service for free to provide free consultation at all hours of the day. At 3 in the morning, you'd still get 100 doctors online who take calls from patients. During 2021, we actually used this for cyclone. Right now, we're actually repurposing it again to 5 minutes left. Goodness. Okay. We need a bit more time. Can I take 10? Is that possible? Okay, thank you. So this became the emergency food support. Now it's becoming the support for flood. Another thing that we tried with the Supreme Court in 2016 and 17 and catastrophically failed was to digitize our judiciary. So we made some progress and then it was stopped. But COVID actually helped us accelerate. So because all courts were closed and overcrowding was actually getting worse in the prisons because bail hearing could not happen. So the Prime Minister and the Chief Justice discussed and virtual court was introduced within 12 days. So it was again repurposing and combining old technologies. And we actually had hundreds of thousands of bail hearing. Overcrowding in prisons went down by 11% in 3 months. So all these success stories that really created a sense of confidence that digitization actually helps citizens and also the government. I'll talk a little bit about data. So we started doing a lot of data platforms. So SDG Tracker was introduced in 2017 at the UN General Assembly. This was launched by the Honorable Prime Minister of the General Assembly. And about 80 different organizations now provide data into SDG tracking, which is reported to the UN in terms of achievements. But what we saw was that the data idea really crystallized during COVID. So it's not progressing. এটা কাজ করছে না। আমি নেক্সট বলি নাকি? So I'll just continue without the slides. I don't remember what I wrote, but I'll continue nonetheless. Slide কি আনা যাবে? 1 second. Okay. So I'll continue. So the thing that we saw is that previously policymakers, senior policymakers, both politicians and members of the civil service, they did not make decision in most cases based on evidence and data. So that changed during COVID because data became so prevalent in terms of health, in terms of social safety net. So we actually saw data streaming in from many different locations, both public and private. And I wanted to show you a picture of that. During COVID, we used data from the telcos, again, private sector data, never before used by the government. So data from the telcos to track where the disease was progressing, because we did not have more than one RT-PCR center in a country of 165 million. So this became the motto. So setting up cross-agency and public-private partnership data collection tools, leveraging big data such as telco and social media, and building policy-focused dashboards. So that became a very important tool within government. So this is a tool that we built for the Prime Minister, which was used by all the civil surgeons across the country in terms of tracking the disease district by district and also in the metropolitan areas, ward by ward. I'll go a little faster. We started working with the several development partners and researchers, not only from within Bangladesh, but also across the world, especially in the UK and in US, to develop what is called the socioeconomic recovery tracker. Again, data coming in from many different organizations to create visualization for policymakers to make effective and timely decisions. So this is a few slides taken from Dr. Mushfiq Mubarak's slide, where data analysis was used to answer questions like what should be the target for economic and financial assistance? Whom should we support? Which occupational groups suffered the highest food insecurity? How the district experienced changing per capita remittance coming in from across the world. Can remote education, which we actually trialed during COVID using our Parliament TV and also the internet, so that remote education has it really helped children during school closure? In many cases it did, in many cases it did not. Then the policy questions that came up, socioeconomic indicators aligned with SDGs. So these are many of the policy questions that came through analysis of the data that came from many different organizations, both public and private. This is something that we started working with Google on in terms of improving our flood forecasting. So one of the things that we started is forecasting regular floods, not flash floods, because flash floods are much more difficult. So again, data from the last 10 years in our water development board given to Google, and Google using its artificial intelligence engines to predict how floods would move within the country. And they're now working on flash floods. Obviously, it has not worked as well because flash floods are much quicker. This is something that we are now working on with an organization in New York called Give Directly, and also University of California, Berkeley, to use artificial intelligence in people's usage of phone to understand how their poverty status changes during crisis. And this is something Stefan and I discussed. Based on this, we can actually do proactive or preemptive social safety nets. So even before the event happens, we can actually provide assistance. So this is being trialed in an analog way in the country by Red Cross. But again, if we use digitization, this can become a lot more effective. And Stefan has a lot of data on how this can become more effective in Bangladesh. So there are 4 quadrants here, which I want to draw your attention to. The first quadrant is the left top, is the accessibility by citizens. So direct access and indirect access, both are very important. So direct access for people who have the capacity, who have the affordability, and indirect access for people who don't have internet access, who may not be able to afford it. So going to digital centers or 333. On the right quadrant, talking about the capacity of civil service providers, of the organizations within the government and private sector. So there, I mentioned a lot of DNA change that happened over time, and that's very, very critical. On the left bottom, you will see different approaches that we took. So rapid digitization, we introduced tools and technologies, and also slow digitization, where more sustainable technologies were built. And on the right bottom, many of the Lego blocks, we call them policy Legos. So things that come together to create new innovations very, very quickly. So a lot of technologies came together. So TCV I mentioned, that's a measure of inefficiency in service delivery. And we've been able to reduce inefficiency by delivering about 4 billion services electronically across about 1,500 services, by reducing 12 billion days, about $16 billion, and about 7 billion, eliminating 7 billion visits in the last 11 years, 12 years. So I'll leave you with 6 lessons in terms of changing culture of civil service as far as digitization is concerned. The first one is demonstration of political will for role reversal, that services will go to citizens. They don't have to come to service delivery centers. So the services will reach citizens. Avoiding big bang approach, we saw that the quick wins, small experimentation, and then making them successful and then scaling them up actually worked better than just having mega projects. Breaking silos within government. So this was very, very important. So not one ministry, the agriculture ministry or the ICT ministry or the health ministry working alone. It's actually a combination that works the best. And also later on, partnering with the private sector and with academia and with research organizations and with non-profit sector. End of subsidies. So a lot of the things that we tried to do in terms of digitization had to actually come up with business models. So I talked about the digital centers, I talked about 333, I talked about many other things where actually income was generated. It was not that government or donor partners actually provided subsidies for the longest time. Nurturing what we call the concept of govpreneurs. So entrepreneurship attitude and skills within the government. So there we talked about failure is okay. And we talked about a lot of autonomy and competition across. And then the use of data for analytics in this decision making. So this was very critical. So these 6 things were lessons for digitization in Bangladesh. In the last 4 or 5 years, Bangladesh actually became a leader in South-South cooperation in digitization. So we were working with about 40 different countries. About 10 or so countries have actually adopted many of the technologies and approaches. Many of these countries are actually higher in terms of per capita income. So Turkey, Jordan, Philippines, so they're actually using the approaches that we have developed in Bangladesh. So I wanted to talk about 2041, but I'll just end with a video. What are we thinking about in the next 20 years of digitization and how the DNA change will continue to happen? So a short video, 2 minutes. last slide to Devin, just for 10 seconds, I wanted to show something. So Stefan talked about collaboration, and also Honorable Vice Chancellor talked about collaboration. And this collaboration will be the underpinning of digitization and transformation of service delivery. So that collaboration will have to happen across public and private spheres. So within private, actually we'll have non-profit and for-profit private sector. Citizens will actually form the part of that collective. Academia and research, media will have, and the new media, social media. And then importantly, artificial intelligence will actually bind all these things together and will have a mind of its own. And we're already seeing Google claiming, or at least a Google employee claiming, that AI has become sentient. So these are things that will happen as we try to build the Bangladesh of 2041, our next target, which is going to be a developed country. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm deeply aware that we are running a bit behind. So I would like to thank both the keynote speakers. Just two thoughts, as we move to tea for both the speakers, and perhaps we can have conversation as we get into the conference. I mean, the first to Stefan. I mean, Stefan talked about these three, I think three factors: bureaucratic politics, economic incumbency, and elite commitment. Now, I think, and I think he sort of alluded to the fact that digitalization, in some ways, there may be an opportunity to have a different kind of economic incumbency, and through that, perhaps have a different kind of elite compact. And this is something I think Stefan has been talking about as a part of his new book, The Development Bargain. So it'd be good to perhaps think that how does digitalization create perhaps new opportunities through opening up economic incumbency in a more competitive domain to be able to actually create competition within the elite bargain itself. So I think that's a question to Stefan, and perhaps he can think about that, or maybe he's already thought about it. And then finally, I think to sort of Anirbhai, I mean, it's sort of fascinating in terms of what has been done, and I think something I talked about when I was giving my welcome talk is that there's a lot that has happened in Bangladesh, and A2I has been a kind of a real kind of a platform in terms of driving all of these innovations. It's actually calling itself now Aspire to Innovate rather than A2I, which was about access to information. Now, I think the central challenge here is that I think, how do we really turn this into a proper knowledge platform where it actually, through which we can actually lift up the knowledge sector of Bangladesh itself? And I think that really is the challenge. I think A2I does, work a lot. I mean, there's a lot of international collaboration that's happening, but I sometimes feel it's not as joined up as it could be. And it cannot be as joined up as it can be unless it's nationally grounded. And I think that is something that we need to think about. How do we create that knowledge partnership to be able to turn A2I into a knowledge platform that transforms the knowledge sector in the country itself? So I think that's the other kind of thought that I had. And I'm sure we will be talking about all of these throughout the conference, and especially as we build towards a concluding session. Thank you all very much. Let's move for tea. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for joining. Our second session will start at 11:45 sharp. Please feel free to bring your tea and snacks inside. We'll start at 11:45.